Next up, as many of us slowly reemerge from our homes and more than a year of COVID precautions fall away, we're also taking a look at the lessons we've learned during the pandemic, and not just about staying safe from the virus. Last week, Governor Baker and the state legislature worked out a deal to extend several pandemic-prompted policies, including eviction delays for those who've been affected by COVID and are applying for rental assistance, remote public meetings for town councils, state boards, other bodies, and cocktails to go and outdoor dining for restaurants and bars. But others are also drawing attention to the social problems COVID fed into that we have not yet addressed, like the immense pressures on working mothers to give their all to both their families and their jobs. In her latest piece, Boston Globe columnist and associate editor Shirley Leung argues the pandemic has provided a once-in-a-generation chance to course correct how we work. She calls it a working mother's manifesto. She joins me now along with Kim Borman. Kim is the executive director of the Boston Women's Workforce Council. Kim, good to see you, and Shirley, you as well. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Shirley, many of us, myself, thought that a hybrid workplace going forward was not quite a panacea, but a big part of the answer. But you wrote something like, the mere act of working from home doesn't magically create work-life balance or a level playing field. Why doesn't it? It seems to me it goes a long way in that direction.
On the one hand, it does. It allows a lot of working parents the flexibility to work from home without feeling penalized. But there could be new inequities that arise from a hybrid workplace.
Like what?
For example, what if when you you allow a hybrid workplace and it's only men? More men take advantage of it than women. So suddenly you create an insider-outsider culture. And so the men who are in the office get promoted at a higher rate than women who choose to stay at home because they still remain the primary caregivers.
So Kim, do you agree with that?
I do, to an extent. I think that it is not the panacea. There's many other things that have to be done. And one of them is what we say is you have to start by doing the math. You have to look at the data, and especially now after we've been through a pandemic, how your workforce fares up in terms of your gender and racial wage gap. So that's where you need to start. And then hybrid work situations may be a part of the answer, but not the entire.
When you say look at the data is far worse after what a couple of million women disappeared from the workforce because of the inability to essentially not to get the support they needed to be able to do both those jobs. Is that not correct? They're further behind than they were last March.
Well, it's interesting you say that. We are waiting to see the data. So our organization collects data anonymously from 250 organizations, employers throughout Greater Boston. And what we do is we look at how are those companies that have taken a pledge and are dedicated to closing the gender and racial wage gap, where they are on this gap. So we will see, because we just closed the portal, I'll be able to tell you better in a couple months where we are.
You know, Shirley, it seems to me this is one of these areas where most of us talk a really good game and don't walk it very well at all. What are a couple of things that you think pass the laugh test, meaning that corporate Massachusetts, for example, might embrace that could restore or create a balance that should have existed before?
Well, in terms of women in the workplace, I mean, one of the problems is that a lot of women did drop out, and there's got to be a path for them to return. A lot of times when women drop out, they feel like there's no clear path for them to return. So employers need to open up their doors as school normalizes. You know, how do we get women not only back to the office, but also, you know, how do we get back on track? They're not penalized for taking a year off and taking care of their families. And there's all sorts of ways to do that. You could do that with what they're calling returnships. You know, you come back at a, you know, in a you know, kind of interim capacity, see if it works out, see if this new role works, or you decide that you bring people back and you measure their you don't take that time off. That time off doesn't count against them.
It seems to me, Kim, another way to deal with this imbalance that is, at least from my assessment, your data may show otherwise, has gotten worse, is to start getting serious about childcare. I about 2 decades ago, I talked to Arnold Hyatt, who then ran StrideRight and was the first major corporation to do child care in the workplace, I think anywhere. The numbers have not grown dramatically, and until they do, a lot of the goals that you and Shirley and others have won't be realized, will they?
You're exactly right. And it's not something that employers can do alone. It's going to have to be, in fact, that's something that the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement does a lot with, is training child care providers. Yes, we do believe that employers, if they can afford it, need to offer on-site child care or subsidies for child care, because we all saw it. We all saw it on Zoom, people trying to work with their kids also on remote. It's got to be taken care of.
You know, Shirley, you pose this as a once-in-a-generation opportunity. I have to say, count me in the doubtful category. When the air was so clean after a couple of months of the pandemic, we said, we're finally going to fix the environment. Well, that was then. Look at the air now. We're going to learn all these things about public education and reimagine public education. I haven't seen it yet, at least going forward. Is this more than a pipe dream that we're going to take this once-in-a-generation opportunity, Shirley?
Well, we all have to fight for it. We all have to want it. And it's not just working mothers, but I think actually the biggest difference will be working fathers. The men stayed home this time. A lot of women were doing hybrid, but some men stayed home. Actually, a lot of men, white collar workers.
And took care of the kids? I don't think so.
Well, they stayed home and they got more family time. They got to have dinner with their kids. They got to take them to school because they weren't traveling as much. And you hear that. I actually think what will make the difference if the men finally have the courage to be like, I am willing to not be in the office as long as I have been and stay home and be with the family, which then allows their wives, right, to further their careers. That's the balancing act that needs to happen.
Call me when that happens, will you? So, Kim, if people are listening and saying, I'm an employer, I want to do what these people are talking about, what's the baby step that they can take to start the process, to sort of, crack the door open so that there's greater possibility? And I only have about 30 seconds left.
What we say is start with the math. And we have on our website, the bwwc.org, 3 very simple calculations that you can do to start to see if you have a gender and racial wage gap, and then some ideas that we offer to try to close it.
Who doesn't have a gender and a wage gap? I mean, does anybody? I'm serious. Does anybody? I know you want the precise numbers. Which is that company that doesn't have a gender pay gap?
Probably a company that's all women, but you're right. I think you're probably right, but we'll get there someday, Jim.
Okay, fair enough. We'll keep reading and we'll wait for your data. Kim, thanks so much. Shirley, as always, great to see you. Be well, both of you.
Thanks.
Thanks.